Joining us now for World Brief and the review of some of the headlines of today's newspapers from around the world is Adefemi Akinsanya. Good morning, Adefemi. A few days now to Ojúde Ọba.
Yes.
We are waiting for our roasted ram.
Don't you trust me, Dr. Ruben? I never disappoint when it comes to these things.
Officially, Mommy, I want to say thank you so much. Mommy, God bless you.
Amen.
Mama Edebe.
Oh.
That's all I'm going to say.
So my mom made fresh moi for Rufai.
May ram not be costly in Ijebu land.
Oh.
So that you bring us...
We'll say amen to that. All righty, good morning to you all, and good morning to you viewers. Let me tell you what's happening around the world. Now, US President Donald Trump has shifted from declaring a peace framework with Iran being largely negotiated to instructing negotiators not to rush as core disagreements over uranium enrichment and asset releases still remain. Now, the proposed deal involves lifting the Strait of Hormuz blockade in exchange for halting Iran's nuclear enrichment, but significant gaps remain regarding compliance verification and Israeli security concerns. Now, White House officials have taken a cautious tone, suggesting that a deal could take days to finalize. Now, going back to Donald Trump himself, this is what he had to say. Let's take a listen. So let's take a look, rather. So he says the negotiations are proceeding in an orderly and constructive manner. Then he goes on to say that he has informed his representatives not to rush into a deal, that time is on their side. The blockade will remain in full force and effect until an agreement is reached, certified and signed. Both sides must take their time and get it right. So we'll have to keep our eyes and ears across what is happening between the United States and Iran. Now, staying in the United States, a 21-year-old gunman identified as Nasire Best is dead after opening fire on a Secret Service checkpoint right outside the White House. Now, Secret Service agents instantly returned fire, killing the suspect, who had a history of psychiatric illness. Now, President Trump himself was inside the White House when this happened, but he was not injured. However, a civilian bystander was shot and is now in stable condition while police investigate whose bullet struck them. Now, the immediate chaos sent reporters on the North Lawn scrambling for safety as the entire complex plunged into a hard lockdown. Let's take a look at the moment journalists were forced to duck for cover.
Today, but this obviously comes just a couple of weeks after a shooting at the White House correspondence.
Only for the two sides to remain far apart.
The difference there. One reporter was still kind of trying to scope the scenery, and then you had another reporter who hit the floor as soon as she heard the bullets. Very interesting times. Very glad that none of those journalists were hurt, and the bystander that was struck remains in stable condition. Let's move on to the African continent, because a full-blown constitutional standoff has erupted in West Africa, and this is following the sudden resignation of Senegal's parliament speaker. Now, it is considered to be a strategic move, widely expected to clear the way for the newly ousted Prime Minister Ousmane Sonko, in order for him to seize the speakership and then lead a fierce legislative opposition against the presidency. Now, the speaker's resignation came just hours after President Bassirou Diomaye Faye sacked Sonko over the weekend, his long-time ally, and completely dissolved the government immediately after. Now, the dramatic late-night firing shatters the powerful political partnership that won the 2024 elections, following months of intense internal feuding over how to handle Senegal's severe economic crisis. Still staying in Africa, where Romuald Wadagni officially took the oath of office as the President of the Republic of Benin on Sunday. Now, he succeeds former President Patrice Talon as he begins his first day. Now, the swearing-in ceremony took place in Cotonou at the Palais de Congrès, before the president of the Constitutional Court, now President Wadagni, who previously served as Benin's Minister of Economy and Finances, will serve now a 7-year term. In his inaugural address, he did talk about how he will prioritize strengthening the national economy while addressing regional security concerns. Well, let's move on to our newspaper headlines across Nigeria and indeed the world. We're starting off with the front page of this day, which leads with President Tinubu securing the APC presidential ticket with over 10.9 million votes as he called for unity, dialogue and deeper reforms ahead of the 2027 elections, while promising to strengthen security, infrastructure and economic growth. Now, this day also highlights growing optimism over a possible breakthrough in US-Iran talks, with negotiations focused on ending hostilities, reopening the Strait of Hormuz and easing global energy tensions. This is although President Trump warned against rushing into a final deal. Let's take a look at the Daily Independent up next. Now, the Daily Independent this morning is looking into concerns by experts who say that economic reforms alone may not revive Nigeria's private sector without improvements in insecurity, infrastructure and policy coordination, as insecurity now tops inflation as forex instability as the biggest challenge facing businesses. Now, the Punch this morning is focusing on the ADC. Their presidential race is beginning today. Their direct primaries happen today with Atiku Abubakar, Rotimi Amechi and Mohammed Hayatuddin battling for the ticket ahead of the 2027 elections. Now, the Vanguard this morning is highlighting concerns over the lack of insurance cover for Nigerian airports following the fire incident at the Murtala Mohammed International Airport Terminal, with experts warning that the federal government may face huge financial liabilities in the event of major disasters. Next up, we have the New Telegraph, and it's looking at the NCDC, just the story up here. And it says that the Nigerian Center for Disease Control has placed Nigeria on high alert over the risk of Ebola importation from outbreaks in Uganda and the Democratic Republic of Congo, with emergency surveillance and response measures activated nationwide. Now, next up, we do have the Daily Trust this morning, and the Daily Trust is reporting that Nigeria remains the World Bank's third largest borrower through International Development Association. This is with debt exposure starting at $18.5 billion, despite concerns over the country's rising debt burden and future repayment pressures. Staying with the paper, it does also take a look at the political landscape. Now, we'll move on to our British papers this morning, and the iPaper is running an exclusive front page story saying embarrassing texts will reveal how ministers in the UK sucked up to disgrace former Labour cabinet minister Peter Mandelson. You just can't get away from the story. Next up, we do have the Financial Times this morning, and the FT is looking again at Donald Trump and him telling US negotiators not to rush into a deal with Iran as they seek to broker an agreement to put this war to an end, which is nearing the 3-month mark. And the Daily Telegraph this morning has the picture headline, so you know I can't leave this without highlighting Arsenal yet again. Their headline says, "Now you're gonna believe us," and this is of course as you see Arsenal manager Mikel Arteta and members of the winning squad lift the trophy on the last day of the season. Those are your newspaper headlines and your world brief.
Congrats again, Arsenal.
Thank you.
See, political dynamics. Congratulations, Wadani in Benin, but let's not support evil. Talon stifled opposition. In fact, the reason why Wadani got like 94% of the votes is because that the opposition was not even on the ballot in the first place. So, as far as I'm concerned, these are sham elections. Talon has put himself there, but Talon should not also forget, as he's played out in Senegal, he's always played out in Benin. Talon himself had that political godfather founder relationship with Boni Yayi, and they fell out. It was not even Wadani. Wadani was the second option. There was another guy called Biko that was supposed to be Talon's anointed successor. They fell out. So let's watch and see. Will Wadani follow with Talon? He's going to be there for 7 years. I doubt that Wadani, that used to be formerly of, that used to be a partner in Deloitte, set up Deloitte in Lubumbashi and a couple of other African countries, will be saying yes, sir, to Talon for the next 7 years. So you might have another one brewing in Benin like it's in Senegal, but time will tell.
I think one of the positive aspects of Benin is that the First Lady is possibly one of the most accomplished First Ladies we have on the continent at the moment. Oxford-trained, Harvard-trained, has worked for EcoBank.
What about Mrs. Tinubu? Stop that rubbish. What do you mean? Senator, many times senator.
I'm just going to focus on her own academic and professional credentials.
We know our First Lady is accomplished. We know this.
It's not a comparison. I'm just celebrating her as being incredibly accomplished. And I look forward to seeing what that looks like in the role of First Lady, especially with her banking background. What stood out to me on the inauguration yesterday was the attendance of prime ministers from Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. So is this a thawing in relations in Western Africa? Are we starting to see a demeanor where we might be warming up and looking for ways to collaborate, especially where security issues are concerned? Of course, Nigeria was very well represented, and we know that Benin Republic is Nigeria's only ECOWAS border at the moment, so that's important. I close quickly in Senegal by saying let's also not forget that the straw that broke the camel's back was the conversation around subsidy. Because last week, the president, Diomaye Faye, wanted to remove subsidies, and Sonko blocked that. So fuel subsidies coming up again in another African country as a huge bone of contention.
Okay, well, the Memorandum of Understanding talked about in the expected finalized negotiations between Iran and the United States, will it come to play? There are doubts, principally because President Trump is giving mixed messages. By Saturday, he said, the agreement had been largely finalized. Both the Iranians and the Americans said, they were heading towards a resolution that would result in a 60-day ceasefire, a resolution on uranium enrichment, and then the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. But as of this morning, the message is different, because yesterday President Trump was saying, his own negotiations should be very careful. They should not rush to judgment. So, in other words, we have not seen any great hope with regard to the conflict over Strait of Hormuz and between Iran, Israel, and the United States. Whatever happens at the end of the day, it will take a while before the problem can be solved. President Trump is not so clear. He says those who are criticizing him are losers. But in the long run, we will know who is the loser and who is not the loser. However, oil prices have moderated. Brent crude, which is the benchmark, is down to $98. The WTI is down to $91, and there's some expectation, particularly in Asia and Japan, where